When my sister sold the box, she didn't just sell metal, she sold everything I'd kept quiet about for years. Every sacrifice, every apology I never asked for but gave anyway. My name is Peggy Thornton, and for most of my life, I believed loyalty meant swallowing the hurt and smiling through it. I told myself that family was worth the silence, the unpaid debts, the jokes at my expense, the way gratitude turned into expectation. But the day I saw that box listed for $250, something in me stopped moving. Not rage, not disbelief, just the slow, clean break of a person who's finally had enough. That was the moment I realized. I can't keep protecting people from the weight of their own choices, and none of them, not even my sister, had the faintest idea what that silence was about to unleash. The house was quiet enough to hear the refrigerator hum. Saturdays always started that way for me. No calls, no noise, just the sound of air moving through a place built for one. Outside, Alabama sunlight pressed through the blinds, pale and heavy. I had no plans beyond cleaning the garage and fixing the dripping faucet I'd been ignoring all week. That was how I liked it. Everything predictable, everything in my control. The garage smelled like old paint, metal, and the faint ghost of jet fuel that never really left my clothes, no matter how many years passed. I stacked boxes against the wall, sorting through years of things I didn't need but couldn't throw away. A stack of training manuals, a dented thermos from deployment, a framed picture of a squadron lined up on an airstrip somewhere that probably doesn't exist anymore. When I pulled back a canvas sheet, the sound of fabric dragging across concrete echoed like memory. There it was, the wooden box, oak, polished once, now faded at the edges. The brass latch was cold under my fingers. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside lay 17 medals, 2 commendation letters, and a torn patch from an airlift mission that had gone wrong and right all in one night. Each piece had a weight that wasn't just metal, sweat, sand, and names that no one says out loud anymore. I held one between my fingers, catching a flicker of light against its surface. There was something grounding about that box. It reminded me that I'd once stood for something that required discipline, not approval. I'd traded comfort for purpose, and I never regretted it. What I regretted was how easily I'd let that same discipline dissolve whenever my sister needed something. Layla had a gift for turning urgency into virtue. Every crisis she made sound noble. A loan to get back on her feet, a car payment that would get her to work, a mistake that anyone would make. And I always came through. Every time. I told myself that's what family was for. The truth was simpler. I wanted peace. I wanted her to like me, to see that I wasn't just the serious one, the one who left home and came back changed. I wanted her to see me as someone she could depend on, even when it meant bleeding quietly so she wouldn't have to. That afternoon, while I was wiping the grease off my hands, my phone buzzed. Her face filled the screen, bright, filtered, perfect. Behind her, white fabric hung from a rack, and laughter filled the frame like perfume. "Peggy," she said, "I'm getting married. Venue in Nashville. They need the deposit today. I just need a little help, please." I could see her fiancé, Dylan, in the background, tall, confident, already acting like the world owed him something. Her hand rested on his shoulder, the diamond catching the light. "Layla," I said, "I've helped all I can. It's your turn now." She blinked, surprised, then tilted her chin just enough to show offense. "You always think everything's a rule," she said. "You don't get it. Some of us just want one good day. Not every life has to be lived on a checklist." The call ended before I could answer. The screen went dark, reflecting my face back at me, smaller and harder than I remembered. I set the phone down beside the box, the metals glinting under the yellow bulb overhead. For a long moment, I didn't move. The air felt thick, the kind that fills a room when something has just broken, but no one said it out loud yet. Outside, the cicadas were loud enough to drown out my thoughts, but not the hollow feeling settling in my chest. I ran my thumb over the edge of a medal. The engraving caught the light, letters carved into metal that outlasted friendships, relationships, promises. These things had survived sandstorms, midnight repairs, and the constant hum of engines miles above ground. They had value, even if no one else could see it. When the night came, I made coffee strong enough to burn and sat in the garage again. the smell of oil mixing with the bitter steam. The box sat on the table beside me, closed now. Latch clicked. I stared at it and thought about the people who never came home. The promises I made to myself after each deployment. That I'd live honestly. That I'd never let anyone cheapen what we fought for. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten. Layla's laughter still echoed in my head, bright and easy. She'd always been light to my gravity, chaos to my order. But lately, her joy felt like a debt I couldn't pay anymore. It wasn't the money. It never was. It was the way she looked at me, as if what I'd done, what I'd been, had already expired. As if my years of service were just an old story that made her uncomfortable. I stood, switched off the light, and locked the garage door. The latch clicked twice, echoing through the stillness. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted. Not anger, not yet. Just a quiet understanding that the balance between giving and losing had finally tipped. The metals inside the box gleamed faintly through the crack of light under the door, catching the last breath of the bulb before it went dark. I didn't know it then, but the next time that box would be opened, it wouldn't be by me. And what it would reveal wouldn't just test loyalty, it would redefine it. 3 days after a short work trip, I pulled into the driveway and noticed the garage door half open. That was the first thing wrong. I always locked it. Always. Inside. The air smelled different. Fresh dust mixed with something sharp, metallic. A few cardboard boxes were moved, the stack uneven. My tools weren't where I'd left them. Then my eyes went to the top shelf, where a rectangular shadow of dust outlined the empty space. The box was gone. I called Layla before my mind could talk me out of it. Her voice burst through the speaker, bright, careless, with a song playing loud in the background. "Oh, hey, Peg, I stopped by your place earlier. Dylan needed the air compressor, so I grabbed it. I cleaned up some of that mess in the garage. Looked awful in there." My heart thudded once, hard enough to shake the breath out of me. I asked where the box was. The oak one, with my name carved in the front. "Maybe," she said, laughter still in her voice. "I might have moved it when I was tidying up. Check the truck, maybe?" "Don't worry about it, nothing important." I hung up and just stood there, phone still in my hand, staring at that empty spot. The silence after a lie is loud in a way only family can make it. That night, I couldn't sleep. The clock ticked too loud, the walls too thin. Around 3 a.m., I gave up trying. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the blue light painting the room in something cold and sterile. Out of impulse, or maybe dread, I typed Air Force medals into eBay. It took only seconds. The first listing at the top froze me. Authentic Air Force medal collection. Engraved latte. Peggy Thornton, $250. Buy it now. There it was. My name, clear as day, cut into brass and silver, gleaming beneath the flash of a stranger's camera. The photos were close-ups, the kind of detailed shots people take when they want to prove something is real. Every medal, every ribbon, even the torn patch from Guam, all of it displayed like trinkets at a yard sale. Seller, Layla TN32. I didn't move for a long time. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence while my chest went numb. My sister hadn't misplaced it. She'd sold it. When my hands stopped shaking, I hit call. Layla answered, breathless, as if annoyed I'd interrupted something important. "What now, Peg? You listed my medals." "Oh, come on. Don't make this a thing. I needed a couple $100 for the photographer's deposit. You weren't using them. They're just metal. You have plenty of those, right? They're not yours," I said. "They belong to the government. Each one's tagged, numbered. They can't be sold." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that cuts deeper than shouting. "God, you're so dramatic. You're still living like you're in uniform. I'll buy you a replica if it matters that much." Then she hung up. I stared at the phone, at the tiny red light that said call ended. My stomach twisted, but my mind was clear. Clear in that awful way when you finally see someone without the excuses you've made for them. I refreshed the eBay page. The listing now showed 1 watcher, 1 bid. Someone, somewhere, was placing a price on everything I had fought, earned, and lost. I printed the listing, the paper sliding out of the machine with a mechanical whine. I taped it to the refrigerator door. right where Layla used to leave grocery lists when she lived with me. The picture of those medals stared back at me every time I reached for the milk. I wanted the sight to burn. I wanted it there to remind me of what I'd chosen not to see for too long. People always imagine betrayal as something explosive, a fight, a confession, a breaking point. But it isn't. It's quieter. It walks in wearing your sister's smile, borrows your car, takes your trust, and leaves you with an empty shelf and a name printed next to a price tag. I leaned against the counter, the hum of the kitchen loud in my ears, and let the anger settle like dust. It didn't flare. It just sat heavy, slow, inevitable. For years, I'd told myself that family was reason enough to forgive anything, that helping Layla meant doing what was right. But staring at that piece of paper, I finally understood that forgiveness without accountability isn't grace, it's permission. Somewhere out there, a stranger was bidding on my medals. And for the first time, I realized that the person who'd taught me how to fight for my country never taught me how to fight for myself. By morning, I decided to leave the listing up, not to watch who bought it, but to see what it cost. To her, to me, to everything we used to call family. The coffee maker clicked on automatically at 6, filling the room with the smell of burnt grounds and quiet resolve. I took a sip, bitter and hot, and looked again at the page taped to the fridge. The caption read, "Useless metals, great condition." I didn't cry. I just laughed once, low and dry, because for the first time in years, I finally saw the truth. The only thing useless in that garage had been my silence. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. A picture filled the screen. Layla standing in a bridal boutique, draped in white lace, her reflection multiplied by mirrors. The caption underneath read, "So proud of my little girl. 1 month to go." Her smile was perfect, the kind that always looked effortless, the kind that made people forget how much of it had been bought. For a long moment, I just stared at the photo. Then I set the phone face down on the counter, letting the screen go black. I turned on my laptop, ready to bury myself in work. The inbox was full, mostly status reports and test logs, the usual noise. But near the top, one subject line stood out like a siren. Confidential, DoD security flag alert. The message was brief. An eBay listing triggered a restricted serial match. Report attached. Contact OSI immediately. My throat went dry before I even clicked the file. The attachment opened to a single photo, the same image I'd printed from eBay 2 nights ago. The medals, the engraving, my name. For a second, the room tilted. It wasn't just about family anymore. The system had noticed. The kind of system that doesn't sleep, doesn't forget, doesn't forgive. I scrolled down to the footer, searching for something human. But the signature block was pure machine. Department of Defense. Office of Special Investigations. That box was now evidence. I sat back, staring at the screen. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking wall clock, even the steady rhythm of my own breath. All of it blurred into static. Somewhere between anger and disbelief, one thought kept looping in my head. She sold federal property. I grabbed my phone and dialed Layla again. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright, casual, as if we hadn't argued days ago. "Peg," she said, "can we not fight about the stupid box again? Dylan's picking table settings. We're going with gold rims. It's... Layla, take the listing down, right now." She paused. "Are you serious?" "I am. Delete it before someone else finds it." She laughed softly, the sound light and sharp as glass. "You talk like the FBI's about to show up at my door." "Not the FBI," I said. "The Pentagon." The line went quiet for a beat. Then she burst out laughing. "Oh my God, Peg, you're so dramatic. It's a box of medals, not nuclear codes." Then she hung up. I stared at the screen, the call timer frozen on 21 seconds. My hands felt cold, like the blood had gone somewhere else. When I turned back to the laptop, another message had already arrived. Same subject line. Confidential. Update. I clicked it open. Transaction traced to Layla Thornton. Address confirmed. The words blurred. I read them twice, 3 times, as if repetition could change their meaning. I'd seen the system work before, years ago. Once it's triggered, there's no pause button, no appeal. It doesn't care who you are or what you meant to do. It just moves, fast, efficient, merciless. I closed the laptop and pressed my palms against the cool surface of the counter. The world outside the kitchen window looked unchanged. Sunlight on the grass, a neighbor walking their dog, a mail truck humming down the street, the ordinary rhythm of life carrying on, completely unaware that something enormous had just begun to turn beneath it. I thought about calling my mother, warning her, explaining that this was serious, but the image of that bridal shop flashed in my mind. Layla beaming under a chandelier, everyone clapping, no one listening. They wouldn't hear me now any more than they ever did. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm, to think like the person I used to be, the one trained to assess risk before emotion. But the truth was, I wasn't calm. I was terrified, not for myself, for her. The last time I'd seen the system move this fast, it was over a maintenance breach halfway across the world. Within 72 hours, careers had ended, files sealed, people gone, and now that same machinery was rolling toward my sister. I sat at the table until the coffee went cold, watching the light shift across the floor. Somewhere between exhaustion and dread, I made a decision that didn't feel like one at all. I wouldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Maybe she'd realize. Maybe she'd take the listing down before it went further. Maybe I could still fix this quietly. That's the lie I told myself. And like every lie meant to protect family, it felt almost noble at first. By evening, the inbox was full again. Status updates, project notes, a few emails from OSI marked urgent. I didn't open them, not yet. The printer hummed as I made a copy of that second message, the one with her name, her address. I slid it into a file folder marked personal, then locked it in my desk. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the driveway in amber light. The garage door was shut tight now, the empty shelf still visible through the small window. I tried to eat dinner, but couldn't taste a thing. Tried to watch TV, but couldn't focus. Every sound became a countdown. The dishwasher, the ticking clock, the phone vibrating against the table. By midnight, I was still awake. The hum of my laptop filled the silence as I stared at the unopened emails. My reflection in the screen looked older, harder. One thought kept circling back. Relentless and cold. The system doesn't forget. And once it starts moving, it never stops until it finds what it's looking for. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and for the first time in years, I prayed, not for forgiveness, but for time. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about a box anymore. It was about the quiet cost of love and the noise it makes when the truth finally wakes up. The air inside the Redstone conference room felt heavy that morning, thick with the burn of jet fuel that always drifted in from the test field. I was halfway through a systems briefing, talking about radar calibrations, tolerance readings, the kind of technical language that keeps the mind safely numb, when my phone started to vibrate across the table. Unknown number. Washington, D.C., area code. I hesitated only a second before stepping outside. The hallway was empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights. A calm, clipped male voice came through. Ms. Thornton, this is Agent Ross with the Office of Special Investigations. Are you aware your military medals were recently sold online? For a moment, everything inside me went cold. I gripped the phone tighter and walked farther down the corridor until the door closed behind me. Yes, sir, I'm aware now. He didn't pause. The medal's serial numbers match restricted items from a classified operation. The system flagged it automatically. We've already traced the transaction to a PayPal account under a Layla Thornton. My mouth went dry. I'd known this moment might come, but hearing her name spoken in that detached, official tone made it real in a way I wasn't ready for. Agent Ross continued, methodical, almost bored. We'll need your cooperation. Any texts, emails, or records proving you didn't authorize or assist in the sale. I forced the words out. I'll send everything I have. Back in my office, I opened every folder, every old message, every trace of proof that might separate me from her mistake. The photos of the eBay listing, screenshots of our conversation, the property log from my service record. When I clicked send, my finger trembled slightly. It felt like pressing a trigger I couldn't take back. I had just turned in my own sister. An hour later, my phone rang again. Layla, I almost didn't answer. Her voice came fast, breathless. Peg! Someone just called me from the Department of Defense. They said something about medals. My God. What did you do? You sold what you didn't have the right to sell. Her voice cracked into a shout. You reported me? You actually did this? I stared at the blank wall in front of me. No, Layla, I didn't have to. The government did. The system caught it on its own. She went silent for half a beat, then screamed something I couldn't make out before the line went dead. I stood there in the quiet, phone still against my ear, the tone of disconnection buzzing like static. For years, I'd cleaned up her chaos, smoothed things over, paid the bills she ignored. But this time, her mess had reached a place where no one could clean it up. That night, I went home, parked in the driveway, and sat for a long time before unlocking the door. Inside, the garage looked different. The space where the box had been was still empty, the dust line on the shelf like a gravestone. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, steady and unfeeling. It reminded me of a barracks after lights out. Too quiet, too orderly, as if the silence itself was standing at attention. By the next morning, the story had already started to leak through the base. No one said it to my face, but I could feel the air change when I walked by. A hesitation, a flicker of curiosity. In a place built on precision and secrecy, gossip traveled faster than radio waves. Around midday, my commanding officer, Colonel Danner, called me into his office. The blinds were half closed, casting stripes of light across his desk. He didn't waste time. Thornton, OSI's involved. They'll need full cooperation. I'm not asking what your sister did. I'm asking what you'll do next. I met his eyes. I'll tell them the truth, sir. He nodded once. Good. That's the only armor you have. There was no pity in his voice, and I didn't want any. I saluted out of habit before leaving, though I wasn't in uniform. That afternoon, an email arrived from OSI. Formal summons, Thursday, 0900. Verification of identity and witness testimony required. I read it twice. The language clean and cold. The kind of letter that ends careers when, by the time I logged out, the whispers had thickened into shape. Two technicians paused their conversation when I walked past. Someone else leaned in too close to a coworker, eyes flicking toward me before darting away. The walls of Redstone had a way of amplifying what no one dared to say aloud. A younger analyst stopped me by the break room. She looked nervous, almost guilty, as if speaking to me might get her in trouble. Ma'am, she said, is it true your family's being investigated? I held her gaze, steady and quiet. In my line of work, truth isn't a scandal. It's survival. She nodded quickly and walked away, leaving me alone with the vending machine humming beside me. That night, I lay awake listening to the faint buzz of my phone on the nightstand. No new messages from Layla, no apology, no explanation. Just silence, thick, heavy, unbroken. The kind that doesn't fade, only settles in deeper. I knew what was coming. Once the Pentagon starts tracing, there's no stopping it. The process is like gravity, invisible but absolute. And I had chosen my place in it. Outside, the night smelled of rain and jet fuel. Inside, the empty shelf in my garage waited like a wound that wouldn't close. I had turned in the evidence, said the truth, followed every rule I was trained to follow. And yet, somehow, it still felt like betrayal. Not to her, but to the part of myself that had once believed family meant protection at all costs. That part of me, I realized, was gone now. Burned out. Finished. In its place was something colder, sharper, unshakable. The kind of stillness you feel right before a storm. 2 days later, rain hammered down over Tennessee, the kind that blurred everything, lines on the road, edges of houses, sense of direction. I was at my desk at Redstone, staring at a report I wasn't really reading, when my phone started vibrating across the table. Layla's name lit up the screen. The moment I answered, her voice cracked through the static, breathless and high-pitched. They're here! There are men at my door. They said they have a federal warrant. Behind her voice came chaos, the heavy thud of boots, the low rumble of male voices, one clear and rehearsed. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Peggy, please, make them stop. I pressed a hand against my forehead. I can't. Just cooperate. Layla. You ruined me, my wedding, my job, everything. No, Layla. You did. The line filled with a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. then went dead. I stayed there, phone still in my hand, the rain outside striking the window in steady, violent rhythms. No one else in the office noticed me, stopped breathing for a moment. There was no satisfaction in being right, only the dull, sinking weight of inevitability. By mid-afternoon, the news spread faster than the storm. My supervisor's assistant whispered something in the hallway. Someone else lingered by the coffee station, pretending not to look. I pulled up a local Tennessee news site on my computer, and there it was. Bride-to-be under federal investigation for selling military property linked to the Department of Defense. The article was short, factual, but cruel in its precision. Under the headline was a photo of Layla smiling in her wedding dress, hands clasped in front of her like she was praying. A second image showed me, in uniform, from years ago. Someone had dragged it off social media. Two faces, side by side, under a banner that said "Family Tied to Federal Probe." The phone on my desk started ringing and didn't stop. My mother first, then my aunt, then numbers I didn't recognize. Each voicemail sounded the same, frantic, accusatory, disappointed. "How could you let this happen? Peggy, how could you turn your sister in like that? No one asked if I was okay. No one asked what it felt like to be torn in half between the truth and the only family I had left." When the phone finally went silent, I checked my messages. One new text from my mother. "Layla will lose everything. If you still have a conscience, you'll help her." I read it once, then again, then deleted it without replying. Outside, the rain thickened. It drummed against the metal awning like a warning. I worked late, just to have something to do. Ran maintenance reports, checked diagnostic files, tasks that required no thought and gave no answers. By the time I left the base, it was past 10. The parking lot glistened under streetlights, puddles forming in mirrored pools. I started the truck. The engines hummed steady against the storm, and began the long drive home through slick, empty roads. Halfway there, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. Bright, close, staying with me through every turn. I slowed. They slowed. When I stopped at a red light, the vehicle behind me did too, idling close enough for me to feel its engine through the rain. A black SUV. The driver's window rolled down, and a familiar face appeared, blurred by the rain but unmistakable. Agent Ross. He leaned slightly forward, his voice calm but carrying through the downpour. "Just so you know, Ms. Thornton, your cooperation is why your clearance isn't suspended. But family dynamics make things messy. Keep your distance, for your sake." Then he nodded once and drove off, the taillights cutting through the sheets of rain until they disappeared into the dark. I sat there long after the light turned green. The windshield wipers scraped back and forth, fighting the storm. The dashboard clock blinked 11:07 p.m. Steady and indifferent. That was the first time I understood what real isolation felt like. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes when doing the right thing leaves no one left on your side. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the street was silent except for the rain. The garage door creaked open, and I sat inside the truck for a while, listening to the sound of water hitting the roof. The empty shelf where the box once sat waited for me on the other side of that door, a hollow reminder of what had started all this. I turned off the engine but didn't move. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked unfamiliar. Eyes darker, jaw set tighter. Somewhere along the way, I'd crossed a line I didn't even see coming. The world outside was drenched, blurred, stripped of shape, and for the first time in my life, I realized that doing what was right didn't always mean being safe. Sometimes it just meant standing alone in the rain, watching everything you tried to protect wash away. By Monday morning, the story had broken wide open. The Huntsville Journal ran it above the fold, bold black letters cutting through my breakfast like a blade. Bride-to-be under federal investigation for selling military items. Below the headline, Layla's smiling face stared back at me, dressed in her wedding gown, veil spilling like light over her shoulders. But beneath that photo, in smaller, sharper print, was another line. Sister, former Air Force engineer, questioned by OSI. The break room at Redstone was silent except for the vending machine humming in the corner. No one said my name, but no one looked at me either. Eyes slid away as if I carried static. When I walked into the meeting later that morning, conversation stopped so suddenly it felt like someone had pulled the power from the room. I set my folder down, nodded once to the team, and went on with the agenda like nothing had happened. But inside, I could feel the walls tightening, the invisible line between colleague and liability growing clearer with every breath. By afternoon, the summons arrived. I was called into HR, where two people from administration sat stiffly behind a long table, their tone rehearsed, detached. They used phrases like temporary reassignment, procedural neutrality, and integrity review. What it meant was simple. I was suspended, not because of wrongdoing, but because the word Thornton now carried risk. I signed the paper without arguing. In both the military and the civilian world, integrity review was the polite way of saying your career had been placed on ice. Once your name hits that list, it doesn't thaw easily. When I walked out of the building, the Alabama sky was an opaque gray, pressing low over the parking lot. I sat in my truck for a long while before turning the key, the engine's idle blending with the rain tapping against the windshield. That evening, my phone rang again. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something, habit, guilt, maybe both, made me pick up. Her voice was trembling. "They're saying you called the police on your own sister, that you turned her into the government." I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the rain streak down. I didn't report her. Mom. They found it themselves. A pause. Then the weary sigh I'd known my whole life. No matter how you spin it, she's still your blood. How can you just sit there and watch this happen? Because I won't lie anymore. There was a silence long enough for me to hear her breathing on the other end. When she finally spoke, her voice had gone cold. "You always pick what's right over what's kind." Then she hung up. The next morning, I got called into Colonel Danner's office. He'd been my commanding officer once, years ago, before either of us traded uniforms for suits. He didn't waste time pretending this was casual. "You did your job." "Thornton," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Don't let guilt drag your career down with her." "It's not guilt, sir," I told him. "It's grief." He studied me for a moment, his expression somewhere between sympathy and warning. Then he slid a file across the desk. "OSI's done with you. You're cleared. But there's a note in your record. Family vulnerability. Red ink. It stays." I looked at that single phrase typed neatly on the page. It didn't accuse me of anything, but it said everything. In our world, that was enough to follow you for the rest of your career. A ghost written in bureaucratic code. Danner straightened his papers, as if trying to move on from the discomfort. "There's an opening in D.C. Air Systems Security Division. Take it. Start over." "That's not a suggestion. It's both an order and a favor. A promotion disguised as exile." I nodded once, the only gesture I had left. That night, I packed in silence. The sound of rain filled the small house, steady and endless. Each item I folded into the suitcase felt like shedding a layer of my old life. When I reached the shelf in the garage, my eyes fell on the box. Returned, sealed, and marked with the sticker that read "Property Held. Case 047A9. The tag had yellowed a little at the corners. I ran my fingers over the raised lettering, but didn't tear it off. I couldn't. It wasn't just evidence. It was the line between what I'd lost and what I'd learned. By dawn, my truck was packed. I stood in the doorway one last time, lights still on in the living room, casting long shadows across the floor. For years, that house had been my still point, a place where I could pretend the world outside followed rules I understood. Now, even that felt like a lie. I drove until the city disappeared in the rearview mirror, the road slick with rain and memory. When I reached the top of the hill overlooking the neighborhood, I pulled over and cut the engine. Below me, my old house glowed faintly, the warm lamplight spilling out of the front window. It should have looked like home. Instead, it looked like distance, the kind that grows between people who can no longer meet halfway. For the first time, I let myself cry. Not for Layla, not even for what she'd done, but for the quiet truth that justice and love don't live in the same room. Then I wiped my face, started the engine, and drove toward D.C., toward a new post, a new file, a new version of myself that I wasn't sure I wanted to be. As the rain eased and the sky began to lighten, I caught sight of the reflection of that evidence tag in the rearview mirror. It glowed faintly in the gray dawn, like a wound that refused to fade. And for the first time, I understood. Some scars aren't there to be healed. They're there to remind you that you did not break. Washington, D.C. met me with the kind of cold that didn't move. It just sat heavy in the air, clean and distant, the color of concrete and bureaucracy. The skyline was a repetition of steel and glass, every building the same shade of ambition. My first morning at the Air Systems Security Division began with silence. Not welcome. The corridors smelled like new paint and recycled air, the kind that erased anything personal. I was directed to a conference room on the lower floor, windowless, sterile, walls layered with soundproofing panels. A single folder waited on the table, beside a cup of untouched water. Agent Ross was already there when I walked in. The same calm eyes, same clipped tone I remembered from the phone. He motioned for me to sit. "You understand why we're doing this, Colonel Thornton?" I corrected him without thinking. "I'm a civilian contractor now." "But yes, sir. We just need your full account. Every step, every message, every interaction." I started talking, slowly, carefully. Every word I spoke felt like peeling back skin that had already healed wrong. I told him about the eBay listing, the first call, the report I'd filed, the day the agents showed up at her door. I didn't spare myself, or her. When I reached the part where I'd warned Layla not to touch the box, Ross looked up from his notes. "She knew they were government property?" "Yes, I told her twice." He paused his pen mid-sentence, then nodded once. "Then you've done nothing wrong. Case closed on your end." He shut the folder, but didn't stand immediately. For a second, the formality slipped. "Off the record," he said quietly. "You'd be surprised how many officers cover for family." "You didn't—" "That's rare." I managed a thin smile. "It doesn't feel noble. It feels empty." He studied me for a moment before replying, "That's what truth feels like, most of the time." Then he left. The room stayed silent long after he was gone. Outside, I was met by a man in uniform, Major Miles Carter, the division's lead engineer. He was tall, tired-looking, with that same weathered calm most veterans carried like an invisible badge. He extended a hand. "Heard about your case. Thornton, tough one. You could say that." He gave a small, understanding nod, then told me his own story without prompting. His brother had used his military ID to run up debt while he was deployed in Iraq. When he came home, his parents begged him not to report it. He did anyway. Took him 2 years to be allowed back at the family table. "Best decision I ever made," he said simply. I asked him how he knew it was right, because, he said, "I stopped feeling like a wallet with a brother attached." The words hit harder than I wanted them to. I laughed once, quietly, but it wasn't amusement. It was recognition. For years, I'd been the same. A paycheck, a rescue plan, an unspoken safety net. A soldier in a uniform no one respected anymore, except when they needed something. When we parted ways, he clapped my shoulder, as if to say we'd both survived the same kind of war. Later that afternoon, an email from Colonel Danner came through. "Your transfer to DOSU, confirmed. You'll be under Air Force Command review for promotion next quarter." I stared at it for a long time. A promotion, after all of it. I should have felt relief, pride, even, but all I felt was a hollow kind of stillness. Like winning a battle no one came to see. By nightfall, the apartment was dark except for the dull orange glow of the city outside my window. I opened the suitcase I hadn't unpacked yet. The last thing inside was the box, the same oak one that had started everything. The sticker was still there. Property held, case 047A9. The edges had started to curl, and for a second, I considered tearing it off, letting the surface look whole again. Instead, I found a black marker on the table, uncapped it, and wrote just beneath the tag, "Keep this visible. Truth shouldn't need polishing." The ink bled slightly into the paper, permanent enough. I pressed the tag flat again and stepped back. The apartment was quiet. Outside, headlights passed across the blinds, slicing the darkness into thin white lines. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the box resting in the corner. It didn't shine anymore, not like it once did, but it still carried weight. For years, I'd believed honor meant silence, that protecting others, even when they didn't deserve it, was loyalty. Now I understood that sometimes silence is just another word for surrender. I left the box where I could see it from my bed. Evidence not of what I'd lost, but of what I refused to give up. Somewhere below, a siren echoed through the D.C. streets, the sound fading as quickly as it came. I leaned back, letting the noise dissolve into the hum of the city, into the space between who I used to be and whoever I was becoming. For the first time in years, there was peace in that space. Not the soft, comforting kind, but the hard, earned kind. The kind that comes after fire. The kind that stays. The air in Alabama felt different that morning. Clear, crisp, but without warmth. The courthouse was smaller than I remembered. A 2-story brick building that looked almost harmless from the outside. Inside, it smelled like polished wood and old paper, that familiar scent of bureaucracy where emotions don't belong but always find a way in. I took a seat in the second row, the same spot I used to sit when Layla graduated high school. The room was half full, reporters, a few curious locals, and the same relatives who hadn't spoken to me in months. My mother sat near the aisle, clutching a worn tissue, eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't look up when I walked past. At the front, Layla sat with a public defender, her posture small, her complexion pale under the courtroom lights. For a brief second, she looked like the little girl I used to walk to school, the one who used to hold my hand when crossing the street. Then I blinked, and that girl was gone. The judge entered, robe swaying slightly as everyone stood. His voice was steady, detached, as he read through the charges. Unauthorized sale of federal property. Estimated value, under $1,000. A minor number, maybe. But the courtroom knew what it meant. In the federal system, there's no such thing as a small betrayal. The prosecutor began his case. Exhibits flickered across the monitor. Screenshots of the eBay listing, the bank records, the correspondence with OSI. My name appeared in bold print. Leont, Peggy Thornton, 31st Maintenance Squadron, Rhett. Not as the accused, but as the victim. The room buzzed quietly, a whisper that traveled like static. Someone behind me murmured, "That's her sister, the Air Force one." I didn't turn around. I just stared at the screen where my medals, the ones I once cleaned with care, were now projected as evidence of a crime. When the prosecutor finished, the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. The microphone felt heavier than I expected, cold in my hand. I stood, not to defend or condemn, but to set something right. I told him I didn't want revenge. That word never fit right in my mouth. What I wanted was accountability. I said that my sister hadn't just sold metal. She'd sold trust. And trust, once gone, doesn't regenerate like money. As I spoke, Layla lifted her head. Tears streaked her face, mascara breaking into uneven lines. For the first time in months, she looked directly at me. Her voice was soft, cracked around the edges. "I thought you'd protect me." I met her eyes and answered quietly, evenly, "I did, Layla. I protected you from becoming worse." The words landed like the closing of a door. The room went still. Even the judge paused before continuing. When the verdict came, it was as merciful as the law allowed. 12 months probation, a fine, $3,000 in restitution. No prison, but no absolution either. Layla nodded faintly, her shoulders trembling, as if even freedom had a weight she wasn't sure how to carry. I didn't stay for the rest, outside. The cameras waited, a line of microphones and questions disguised as empathy. The first voice cut through the noise. "Colonel Thornton, do you forgive your sister?" I stopped, turned toward the crowd, and met their lenses head-on. Forgiveness is private. Accountability is public. They're not the same thing. They shouted more questions, but I was already walking away. That night, back in D.C., a delivery arrived at my apartment, a plain brown box with an official seal. Inside was the oak chest, the same one that had vanished months before, now returned by OSI. The silver tag was still affixed. Evidence released. I placed it on my kitchen table. The light caught the foil edges of the tag, making it glimmer like a scar in moonlight. I pressed my fingertips against it, feeling the cold adhesive beneath the surface. There was no satisfaction, no victory, only the quiet recognition that justice, when done right, doesn't celebrate. It just exists. The next morning, I brought the box to my office and hung it on the wall between a framed map of air traffic routes and a photo of my old squadron. The tag faced outward, visible to anyone who entered. A younger analyst noticed it later that day. "Why keep the tag on?" she asked, half curious, half respectful. "Because some lessons deserve to be visible," I said. She nodded, not fully understanding, and left me to my work. When the office emptied and the sun began to fade behind the skyline, I stood alone, watching the reflection of that tag in the window. It was still cold to the touch, still sharp around the corners, but for the first time, it didn't feel heavy. There's a strange kind of peace that follows a storm, not joy, not pride, but stillness, the kind you earn by walking through fire without running, by telling the truth when it costs you everything. That night, I turned off the lights and let the city's glow spill across the box on my wall. The tag shimmered faintly in the dark, catching the last of the day before disappearing into shadow. I didn't feel proud. I felt something rarer, something steadier, the calm that comes when you stop choosing between being right and being loved, and simply decide to live with both truths at once. And in that quiet, I finally understood. The medals weren't what defined me. The scar was. A year passed before her name appeared again. By then, I'd stopped expecting it. Washington had settled into its rhythm. Gray mornings, crowded commutes, the sound of the metro groaning beneath the city like an endless reminder that everything keeps moving, whether you do or not. The trees along Constitution Avenue were turning gold, leaves scattering over the sidewalks like quiet reminders that nothing stays, not even pain. That morning, when I opened my mailbox, I found an envelope wedged between a stack of bills and a security notice. No return address. The handwriting was neat but hesitant, the kind that belonged to someone who hadn't written by hand in years. I knew it before I read it. "Layla." I stood there on the stoop with the wind tugging at my coat as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, creased and smudged at the corners. I lost everything I thought mattered. Dylan left. My followers vanished. "I finally understand what you meant about boundaries. I was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say thank you for not lying to protect me. Layla." I read it twice. Then again. Each word landed differently, heavier than I expected, softer than I wanted. For a long time, I just stood there, letter trembling in my hands, watching the last leaves drift across the pavement. I didn't cry, but something inside me unknotted, slow and quiet, like breath returning after too long underwater. That evening, I placed the letter on my kitchen table beside my coffee mug. For days, it stayed there, every morning. I'd glance at it while stirring sugar into my cup, wondering what kind of courage it took to write it, and why she'd chosen now. A week later, another note arrived. No letter this time, just a napkin folded neatly in half with an address scrawled in the same hand. Constitution Avenue Cafe, 3 p.m. I almost didn't go. I told myself I was busy. That closure was a myth, that some people didn't deserve one. But at 2:45, I found myself walking there anyway. The cafe sat on a corner near the National Mall, tucked between a bookstore and an art gallery. It was half empty when I arrived, the smell of espresso thick in the air. Afternoon sunlight poured through the glass, scattering gold flecks across the floor. Layla was already there. She looked nothing like the woman from the photos that had filled the news a year earlier. No bright lipstick, no designer bag, no restless energy, just a plain gray sweater, jeans, and a face stripped of everything that once hid her. She looked up when I entered, eyes uncertain but not afraid. I sat down across from her. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled, faint and awkward. "I'm not asking to be sisters again," she said. "I just wanted to see you. I've got a small job now, reception at a dental office. It's not much, but it's steady. And I'm clean." I nodded. "I'm glad." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of years, of fights, disappointments, and the kind of silence that hardens between people who once shared everything. We talked about small things first. Rent prices, weather, work. It was almost absurd. How normal it felt to talk about nothing after everything. But in the spaces between those words, something softer took shape. At one point, Layla looked down, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "You were right," she said quietly. "Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're protection." I stirred my drink slowly, watching the cream spiral and disappear. "Forgiveness isn't a gift, Layla. It's a rebuild project. You'll have to prove you can build." She looked up, eyes glistening but steady. "I know. I'm willing to spend the rest of my life building it." There was no apology after that, no dramatic embrace, no tears. Just two women sitting across a scratched wooden table, letting honesty settle where resentment used to live. When we stood, it was almost instinctive. We didn't hug. Instead, she extended her hand, tentative but sincere. I took it. Her palm was warm, trembling slightly. That handshake lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like closing a circle, one that had started with betrayal and ended with acknowledgement, not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to peace. We stepped outside together. The sky had softened into that pale amber that comes before sunset. The wind carried the scent of coffee and rain. She turned left toward the metro. I turned right toward home. Halfway down the sidewalk, I stopped. Through the window of the cafe, I could still see her table. The sunlight had shifted just enough to catch the edge of a metal spoon resting beside her empty cup. For a moment, it glowed under the light, reflecting like a medal. It was such a small thing, just a trick of glass and sun, but it caught me off guard. That tiny glint carried every contradiction I'd been living with: loss and relief, pain and pride, endings and beginnings. I turned back once more. Layla was still sitting there, head bowed slightly, fingers folded over her bag as if steadying herself. She looked like someone learning how to breathe again. I wanted to tell her something, maybe that I was proud, maybe that I'd missed her, but I didn't. Some words belong to time, not people. As I walked away, my reflection followed me in the glass storefronts, fading in and out between strangers passing by. For the first time in a long while, I felt lighter, not because the weight was gone, but because I'd finally stopped trying to carry it for both of us. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about erasing what happened. It was about learning to live with the imprint it left behind. The city was quiet as I reached the corner. The wind swept another handful of yellow leaves across the street. Somewhere behind me, the spoon still gleamed under that soft light, a tiny echo of all the battles I'd fought and the ones I'd finally stopped fighting. Victory doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to stop bleeding for people who never asked you to. As the sun dipped behind the monuments, the city glowed gold one last time before surrendering to dusk. I kept walking, hands in my coat pockets, the letter folded neatly inside. I didn't know if Layla and I would ever sit together again. Maybe that was the point. Some stories don't end in reunion, they end in understanding. And that's enough. Because sometimes, the truest kind of forgiveness isn't spoken or promised. It's lived, one peaceful step at a time. 10 years slipped by, quietly, the way time often does when you've stopped counting in losses. I was no longer the woman who once hid her pain behind precision and silence. I was Colonel Peggy Thornton now, head of technical command at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. My office overlooked the runway, where engines screamed to life every morning and silence reclaimed the field every night. The years had smoothed out the sharp edges of memory, though some things never changed. On the wall, just above my desk, hung the same oak box, the medals I'd once nearly lost to betrayal. The evidence tag was still there, but the words had faded to a faint ghost of their former self, the ink barely visible under the light. What used to feel like a wound now looked almost like an old tattoo, worn and permanent in equal measure. The air in the office always smelled faintly of jet fuel and metal polish. It was grounding. Outside the window, cadets in training uniforms jogged in formation, their voices echoing through the morning chill. I watched them sometimes between reports, remembering what it felt like to be that young, certain that honor was a straight line, that doing right and being loved were the same thing. That illusion was long gone. What remained was steadier, peace built on the foundation of truth, not approval. That afternoon, as I sorted through maintenance logs, a small envelope caught my eye on the corner of my desk. Civilian handwriting, unfamiliar but tidy. The postmark read, Nashville, Tennessee. I opened it carefully. Inside was a birthday invitation, blue ink on cream cardstock, decorated with a hand-drawn rocket ship and a few smudged fingerprints. Ethan's 10th birthday, Saturday, 3 p.m. At the bottom, a short note in Layla's handwriting. We'd love to see you if you can come. I sat there for a long while, staring at it. It had been nearly a decade since we'd last met at that cafe in Desac. After that day, our contact had been sparse. Occasional holiday cards, polite check-ins. We hadn't fought since, but we hadn't rebuilt what was gone either. We'd found a different kind of rhythm, quiet respect, cautious distance. I didn't plan to go. My schedule was packed, and it felt safer to keep the boundary intact. But Saturday came, and as I sat in the stillness of my kitchen with the Ohio winter light cutting across the floor, I found myself driving south. The drive to Nashville felt shorter than memory. The highway rolled out beneath a gray sky, the miles peeling back the years. When I finally pulled up in front of her house, I almost turned around. It was smaller than I imagined. White siding, a swing on the porch, the sound of children laughing somewhere in the backyard. The door opened before I could knock. Layla stood there, holding a plate of cupcakes, her hair pulled back loosely, a streak of flour across her sleeve. For a heartbeat, neither of us said a word. 10 years of silence hung in the space between us, and then, just like that, it broke. We smiled. No apologies, no explanations. She set the plate aside and stepped forward. The hug came naturally. No stiffness, no hesitation, no armor, just warmth. Inside, the house was loud with the chaos of a birthday party, balloons half inflated, paper hats abandoned on chairs, a boy with her eyes running through the living room holding a toy jet. Ethan! When Layla introduced us, he grinned up at me shyly before darting back to his friends. I stayed only an hour, long enough to help cut the cake, to laugh at one of Ethan's jokes, to watch Layla move around the room with a calm I'd never seen in her before. She didn't need rescuing anymore. She'd built something steady, and for the first time, I believed it would last. When I left, she walked me to the door. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. I didn't answer right away, just squeezed her hand before heading down the steps. That evening, back in Ohio, I found myself standing in front of my class of cadets, young, sharp, still learning what it means to hold responsibility without losing yourself to it. We were going over flight inspection protocols, and one of the cadets, barely 20, pointed at the wall behind me. "Ma'am?" she asked. "Why keep that old evidence tag on the metal case? Doesn't it ruin the look?" The class chuckled softly. I smiled. "Because scars remind us where strength came from," I told her. "Without them, we forget the price." The room went quiet for a beat before I continued the lesson, the kind of silence that meant they'd actually heard me. When the last of them filed out and the lights dimmed, I lingered by my desk. The base was quiet now, the hum of the runway replaced by the distant whine of an engine fading into night. On my computer screen, a new message notification blinked. It was from Command HQ, recommendation for promotion, Brigadier General, Technical Operations. For a moment, I didn't breathe. 10 years ago, the idea of advancement had meant something different, proof that sacrifice was worth it. Now, it just felt like the universe quietly closing a circle. I shut the laptop, walked over to the wall, and stood before the metal box. The last rays of sunset poured through the blinds, painting the room in amber. The tag caught the light, its silver surface glowing faintly, the words almost invisible now. I touched it lightly with my fingertips, tracing the edge where the ink had nearly disappeared. "It's okay to fade now," I whispered. "Lesson learned." The light shifted again, and for a split second, the tag shimmered, one last flash of silver before the darkness reclaimed it. I turned off the lamp, grabbed my coat, and stepped outside. The wind off the runway was sharp, carrying the scent of jet exhaust and rain. In the distance, a plane roared to life, its engines thundering across the open sky. I stood there watching until it vanished into the clouds. The air vibrated with power, but it was the quiet that lingered after that struck me. The kind of quiet that comes when you've finally made peace with yourself. The years had taught me that honor isn't about medals or titles. It's about what you hold onto when no one's watching. Truth, integrity, the line between protecting and enabling. I'd spent half my life guarding other people's chaos. Now, I guarded something smaller but infinitely harder to keep. Meaning. As I walked back toward the hangar, the runway lights blinked to life one by one, a constellation forming across the ground. I thought of Layla and her son, of the letter that had started our second chance, of the faded tag that would never truly disappear. Some things aren't meant to be restored to new. They're meant to endure, worn and imperfect, proof that survival and grace can coexist. The wind shifted again, catching the hem of my coat. I looked once more toward the horizon, where the last traces of sunset burned out into night, and I knew, finally, that my life had come back into orbit, not as someone's protector, not as a soldier carrying old wounds, but as a keeper of something quieter, stronger, and lasting: honor, in its truest form.